Education YouTube channel. In this class, we are going to discuss the topic Indian Constitution. Right. So, before starting the session, before starting the discussion, I want to ask you some questions. First of all, we all are going to writing the upcoming examination, right? Are you going to write the examination? Are you going to write? Yes, obviously, you all are going to write the examination. Then how many days we have? How many days we have? How many days there for examination? It is just 5 days, right? We have just 5 days for the coming examination, right? Today is December 1st and the December 6th will be starting the examination. So I hope your preparations are going well. Okay. So in the previous class, we have discussed the topics like communication. We have discussed what are the topics we have discussed in the communication. We discussed the topic models of communication. We discussed about the linear model of communication. We discussed the topic interactive model of communication. We discussed the topic transactional model of communication, and we discussed that examples of linear model and theories from the interactive models of communication and theories of the transactional model of communication. We discussed all these things in detail, and we discussed about Aristotle's model, we discussed about Berlow's model, we discussed about helical model, and everything we discussed it in the previous class, right? Then we started taking the session in the topic higher education. And what are the topics we have discussed in higher education? In higher education, we discussed first of all, we discussed about the basics of the Indian Constitution, right? We discussed about the Constituent Assembly, and we discussed about the drafting committee. We discussed about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib, and we discussed about the major committees and minor committees under the constituent assemblies and the functions other than forming a constitution or other than forming or drafting a constitution. The constituent assembly functions some other areas also, that was like adopting the national anthem and adopting the flag and elected the president of India, elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as a president of India. We know that first president of India, and everything we discussed in the last session, right? And today and the previous session we discussed about features of the Indian Constitution, right? I hope you have watched that video. And what are the major features of Indian Constitution? What are the major features? The major features of the Indian Constitution, we said that parliamentary form of democracy, parliamentary form of government, blend of rigidity and flexibility, drawn from the various sources. We drawn the concept parliamentary form of government from British Constitution, and the fundamental rights from American Constitution. Like we discussed what are the concepts we have drawn from the some other constitution, some other country's constitution, right? So all these things we discussed in the last session, and the yesterday was Anees's sessions, and Anees discussed about logical reasoning. I hope you understand that. And today we are going to discuss about the other important topic that is fundamental rights, right? So fundamental rights are the some of the important topics, because when we analyzing the NTA and NET examination, when we check the questions from previous terms, we can understand that the NTA has been asking the questions from fundamental rights, because it is very important, not only in the examination point of view, but also as a citizen of India. We have to understand fundamental rights. What are the fundamental rights we have? how many fundamental rights are there. So everything we should know as a citizen of India. But in this time, we are going to discuss some of the basics concept of the fundamental rights. I know that, we all know that it is a wide topic, right? If you are a political science student, you have to study in detail. You have to study more about it. But as a paper 1 student, UGC NET exam, paper 1 student, we have to understand the basic concepts and the fundamentals of the fundamental rights. So, we have to understand some of the important things while discussing the fundamental rights. So, all these important things, all these important concepts regarding the fundamental rights, we will be discussing now. So, first of all, what is fundamental rights? What is fundamental right? What do you mean by fundamental right? What does it mean? What is the difference between human rights and fundamental rights? What is the difference? What is the difference between human right and fundamental right? So, fundamental rights, or we can say that FRs, fundamental rights, are the rights which guaranteed and protected by the Indian Constitution. Okay. So these two words, we have to understand these two words, that is guaranteed and protected. Okay, so fundamental rights are the rights which are protected by and which are guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. Okay, so fundamental rights are the rights which are guaranteed and protected by the Indian Constitution. These kinds of rights are known as fundamental rights. And in which part and in which articles the talking about the fundamental rights? In which part is talking about fundamental rights? Which part is talking, which are the articles that are talking by the fundamental rights, about the fundamental rights? Before that, how many articles are there? How many parts are there? How many schedules are there? We discussed all these things in the previous session. So if you missed that sessions, or if you haven't watched those sessions, we have uploaded all this video in this YouTube channel. You can check it now. Okay. So currently we can say that there are 25 parts and 448 articles, then 12 schedules, 25 parts, 448 articles and 12 schedules are there in Indian Constitution. So, in part, the third part says about the fundamental rights. And when it comes to articles 12 to 35 are saying about fundamental rights. So, it is very important. We have to understand that fundamental rights are discussing under the part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and articles 12 to 35 from the Indian Constitution are discussing about the fundamental rights, and these are the rights which are guaranteed and protected by the Constitution. Okay. So how many fundamental rights we have? How many fundamental rights? Is it 5? Or is it 6 fundamental rights? Or is it 7? How many fundamental rights we have? How many fundamental rights we have? So we know that we have 6 fundamental rights. In the initial stage, we had 7 fundamental rights, right? In the initial stage, we had 7 fundamental rights, but we dropped one. Which of the fundamental rights we dropped? It is a property right. We dropped property, right to property, right? We dropped right to property, and initially we had 7, but after the dropping the right to property, then now we have 6 fundamental rights. So how many fundamental rights we have? Now we have 6 fundamental rights. What are the 6 fundamental rights? What are the 6 fundamental rights? So we all know that, or we should know about that. So the 6 fundamental rights are: The first one, right to equality. Then second one, right to freedom. Then the third one, right against exploitation. Then fourth one, right to freedom of religion. And the fifth one, cultural and educational rights. So these are the 6 fundamental rights we have. So we know that we should know about the articles also. So Article 14 to 18 are talking about right to equality. Then Article 19 and 22, 19 to 22 are talking about right to freedom. Then Article 23 and 24 are talking about right against exploitation. Then Article 25 to 28 are saying about right to freedom of religion. Then Article 29 and 30 are talking about cultural and educational rights. Then Article 32 are talking about right to constitutional remedies. So we have to understand all these 6 fundamental rights. We have to check, we have to talk about all the fundamental rights in detail. So we can move to that. So the first one is right to equality. So first of all, when we talk about the right to equality, in the exam point of view, we have to understand that Article 14 to 18, right? Article 14 to 18 are talking about right to equality. Then what is right to equality? What do you mean by right to equality? Right to equality in the sense, we know that there are some castes in India, right? There are different religions in India. Then people are different like gender or sex, like people are different, right? But we know that in front of law all are equal. That is what is the right to equality. Right to equality means all the people are equal to the law. Okay, in front of law all are equal. No one has special rights. That is called right to equality. So there is no differentiation in the name of caste, or there is no differentiation in the name of religion, or there is no differentiation in the name of gender, whether male or female, and there is no differentiation in the name of sex. So all are equal in front of the law, and there are no such differentiation in the name of caste, religion, gender or sex. All are equal. But we know that there are some reasonable discrimination, but as a whole all are equal in front of the law. That is right to equality. Then we can move to next one. Right to freedom. So the next one, the right to freedom. So which are the articles are talking about right to freedom? So from Article 19 to 22 are talking about right to freedom. So right to freedom, under the right to freedom, we have to understand some of the major concepts. In this class, we are talking about 2 major concepts under the right to freedom. Okay, as I said in the earlier, we are discussing today some of the important points. We are not going to discuss all the points regarding fundamental rights. So the exam point of view, we are discussing in the part right to freedom, especially in the 2 areas, that is right to education and protection of 6 rights. So we can understand that in the right to freedom, it is protecting 6 rights. Okay, what are the 6 rights? The first one is freedom of speech and expression. Okay, freedom of speech and expression. What does it mean? In India, we have a freedom to express our voice, right? We have a freedom to express our voice. We can write articles freely, right? And we can direct a film. We can share our thoughts. We can express our emotions, right? So we have right to speak, we have freedom to speech and expression. And the next one, assemble peaceably and without arms. So we can assemble everywhere in India without arms. Yes, right. Without arms, we can peaceably attend or peaceably assemble everywhere in India. And the third one, we have right to form associations, union and cooperative society. So no one can deny this right because we have the constitution has given the right to form associations, unions or cooperative societies and move freely throughout India. So the people of India have the right to move in India everywhere, right? Moving throughout India is one of the right which protected by the constitution. Then reside and settle in any part of India. So India is one of the largest country in the world. We know that we have more than 30 states. So India is one of the biggest countries. So in India, the people of India have the right to reside everywhere in India and have the people of India have the right to settle everywhere in India. In this case also there are some reasonable restrictions, but all over we can understand that we have the right to reside and settle any part of India. Then we have right to practice any professions or trade or occupation or business in India. So these are the 6 rights. These are the 6 rights come under the right to freedom, right? Then the right to freedom also talking about right to education. So it is very important concept. Right to education is very important question, very important topics. So we can understand that there are many terms, there are some questions regarding right to education are repeatedly asking, right? When we understand the question paper, when we analyze the question paper, we can understand that there are repeatedly asking the questions from right to education, right? If you are check the question paper, definitely you can get some questions regarding right to education because it is very important because we all are writing the NET examinations for getting the assistant professorship, right? So when we pass the NET examination, we are eligible to teach the students in the colleges. So it is very important, right, to education. So we have to, as a teacher, we all are understand what is right to education. Then first of all, we have to understand that there is Right to Education Act, right? There is Right to Education Act. When it comes, so we have to understand that Right to Education Act comes from 2009, okay? So Right to Education Act came into force in the year of 2009. So it is very important. Right to Education 2009, Right to Education 2009. So don't forget Right to Education 2009. So in which article? Article 21A, right? Article 21A talk about right to education, and this article declares that state shall provide free and compulsory education to all children of the age of 16 to 14 years. So we have to understand that the article is right, Article 21A. Article is Article 21A, and it talks about state shall provide. That means state has the responsibility. State has the ultimate responsibility to provide free and compulsory education. Okay, to provide free and compulsory education to the age of 6 to 14 years. Okay, primary education, 6 to 14 years children. So in the Right to Education Act says that state has the responsibility to provide education to the children of age from the age 6 to 14 years, and it should be in free, and state should be compulsory give to, or state should be compulsory provide education, compulsory provide free education to the children who has the age of 6 to 14 years. So it is what is saying about the Article 21A. So these points should be understand while discussing the right to education. The next one, right against exploitation. The third fundamental right is right against exploitation. So which are the articles are saying about right against exploitation? So it is nothing but Article 23 and 24. Okay, Article 23 and 24 are talking about right against exploitation. So it includes mainly two rights, that is, first one is prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor. Article 23 are talking about prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor, and Article 24 are talking about prohibition of employment of children in factories. We know that. So in India, after the independence also, in these years also, we can understand that there are human traffic, right? So the constitution has prohibited these human traffics and the forced labor. Forced labor in the sense the government has decided some minimum wages, right? Government has decided some minimum wages for some jobs. If the owner or if the manager or if the employer doesn't give a salary or a reasonable salary regarding the minimum wages act, if the owner or if the employer giving the salary lesser than the minimum wages, it also considered as forced labor. Write that prohibition of employment of children in factories. Okay, prohibition of employment of children in factories also prohibited. So article right against exploitation. So the fundamental right against exploitations are mainly talking about prohibition of traffic in human beings and forced labor, and the prohibition of employment of the children in the factories. So we have to understand these things. So then we can move to the next right. So it is the right to freedom of religion. Okay, so first of all we have to understand the article 25 to 28 are talking about right to freedom of religion. Okay, so don't forget, while going to write examination, we don't forget the article 25 and 25 to 28 are talking about right to freedom of religion, and it says freedom of conscience. Then next, right to profess. So we know that we can strongly believe in our religion, that is means right to profess. Then right to practice. So we have the right to practice the religious activities or religious practices. We have right to practice. Then the last one, right to propagate. Right to propagate means the people or the religious people can share their thoughts, can share their religious views to the public or to the people. So right to propagate also comes under the right to freedom of religion. So these points we have to understand. We don't forget freedom of conscience, freedom of right to profess, right to practice, freedom of right to propagate. All these are come under the right to freedom of religion. Then we can move to next one, cultural and educational rights. So which are the articles are talking about cultural and educational rights? Which are the articles are talking about cultural and educational rights? Article 29 and 13, right? Article 29 and 30 are talking about cultural and educational right. Okay, so in this right we have to understand that it includes protection of language, script and culture of the minorities, that is Article 29. Then right of minorities to establish and administer educational institutions, that is Article 13. So in this article, cultural and educational right, we can understand that there is a right to the minorities have the right to establish the institutions. Okay, minorities have right to establish and administer the institutions, and it is state responsibility to protect language, script, and the culture of the minorities. It is the state's responsibility. So states should be protected the language of the religion, language of the minorities, script of the minorities, and the culture of the minorities, and the minorities have the right to start the education, right to establish the educational institutions. So these all are come under the cultural and educational right. And we can move to the last one. We already said that we have 6 fundamental rights. So the last one is right to constitutional remedies. It is one of the very important right from the fundamental rights. Okay, so that is right to constitutional remedies. Which article? Which article? Article is 32, right? Article is 32. Article 32 is talking about right to constitutional remedies. And we know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Who was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? Who was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? B.R. Ambedkar is known as Chief Architecture of the Constitution, right? Who is Chief Architecture of the Constitution? It is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is known as Chief Architecture of the Indian Constitution, right? And who was the chairman of the drafting committee? Who was the chairman of the drafting committee? Who was the chairman? So chairman of the drafting committee was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, right? Chairman of the drafting committee was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So what was the responsibility of drafting committee? The responsibility of the drafting committee was to draft a constitution, right? So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib was the chairman of that assembly. Then we know that, and this Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib said about right to constitutional remedies. It is nothing but heart and the soul of the Indian Constitution. Okay, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib talk about, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib said about right to constitutional remedies that it is the heart and the soul of the Indian Constitution. So why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib said like that? Why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib said it is heart and soul of the Indian Constitution? Because it says, this right says that the people can move to Supreme Court. Okay, the people can directly move to Supreme Court for the enforcement of the fundamental rights. So we have discussed 5 fundamental rights before, right? Just before we have discussed 5 fundamental rights. If the state deny any of the fundamental rights, if the state deny to any person, if any of the fundamental rights, the people can directly move to the Supreme Court. They don't want to move first in the police station, or they don't want to move first in the district court or municipal court. No need, because in the right to constitutional remedies said that this right saying that if a state deny any of the fundamental rights to any of the person in India, they can directly move to the Supreme Court for the enforcement of that denied right. So that is why Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib said that it is the heart and soul of the Indian Constitution. So these are the things we are discussing today. So we all are preparing for the coming examination. So we don't forget about these fundamental rights, because it is one of the basic concepts. So in the higher education, the NTA has been asking the questions from the Indian Constitution. In Indian Constitution, the very important areas are fundamental rights and the features of the Indian Constitution and regarding the forming the Indian Constitution. So all these topics we have taken in this session and in the previous sessions as well. So thank you. All the best for the examination. Thank you.